for the District of Columbia against members of this body to prosecute them completely illegally and unjustifiably. I think that we have to take a stand, and Ms. Slater may have an impressive background and expertise, but the pattern so far is that this administration is dead set on undermining the independence of the Department of Justice and weaponizing it against the president's enemies. That is despicable, disgusting, and a complete betrayal of the traditions and ethos of an institution that many of us have served and that we revere. My fear is that Ms. Slater's inability to be an independent enforcer of the law will be on us as our responsibility, and I refuse to be an instrument in that kind of misuse of justice. She may resist it, but she lacks the power to overcome the undermining of the independence of the Department of Justice that we've seen all too often. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
You all remember that we've had an hour-and-a-half debate on the fentanyl bill, and I'd like to get it done today.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, regarding Ms. Slater.
Go ahead.
The president doesn't nominate anybody who is not 100% loyal to him. I would very much welcome somebody in his administration who is prepared to stand up to him. I have yet to see that, but I would welcome Ms. Slater vigorously enforcing the antitrust laws. That would be great. But I have serious concerns whether she will be able to stand up to the AG, the FBI director, and on down the line. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are we ready, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to be brief, but I too feel compelled to echo some of the comments that my colleagues have made, expressing the concerns, as you heard me in yesterday's hearing with the three nominees before us. I can't recall a time when not just any nominee by any president, but specifically high-ranking positions within Department of Justice, when those nominees would not clearly and strongly respond to the questions that we've been asking about what if you are asked to do something unconstitutional or illegal or unethical? What would you do in that instance? In addition to that, I asked Mr. Sauer yesterday, I know we're not voting on that confirmation right now, but to articulate what current law is as it pertains to the 14th Amendment. And he would refuse to answer. Different than the response to the tactic that now Attorney General Bondi did, which was to insult me by saying that she wasn't going to do my homework. I wasn't asking her to do my homework. I was asking her to do her homework as she was before us asking for a vote for confirmation. So I do think we are in a different place when it comes to the nominees that have been selected by President Trump, and we're seeing the result of that. What I wanted to add to this conversation, something that I brought up a couple of confirmation hearings ago, is as we zoom out and in the aggregate, it's not just individual concerns, nominee by nominee by nominee, but collectively speaking, you know, given so many of these people's personal history with President Trump, having been his personal lawyer, the concern about true independence and conflict of interest is stronger than ever. And there are protocols in place. If an attorney general has a conflict, they recognize it and respect it, then an important decision, obviously, if it's before the attorney general, then goes to the deputy. If that deputy also has a conflict of interest and recognizes it and respects it, then what? Then it goes to the next person in line. But there's so many people now and soon to be at the highest levels of the Department of Justice. We're at an unprecedented point of where does the conflict stop? Where is the independence, the commitment to the people of the United States and the Constitution, not fealty to the President of the United States that not just us as the Senate Judiciary Committee or Congress as a whole, but the American public, they're losing confidence and faith in this most important of institutions. So colleagues, yes, as we are expressing our concern or even outrage with some of these specific nominees and individual nominees, let's not lose sight of what's happening collectively as these nominees are flying through, because we're not hearing any question, any concern from our Republican colleagues in this committee, let alone in the Senate as an entire body with what's going on here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Just wait for a minute. Go ahead.
So, suggestion was we have a markup on the fentanyl issue. Pick a bill, we'll pick a bill after the issue. We can pick one and let them offer the amendments that they have in mind. Let's discuss it. I think that's what we're trying to get out of this.
Try that. Well, we gotta make sure we can deliver.
Yeah, of course. I'm not trying to trick you into anything. They just want to be able to discuss some options. Yeah. Let's do that.
Okay,
I'll say something public.
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we just had a conversation about the course we're going to follow this morning. I do not presume to speak for the Democratic side on what we will do, but I've asked the chairman if he would consider giving us an opportunity to bring a substantive bill for a markup on the issue of fentanyl, so that many of the amendments which are being discussed and may not see the light of day have a chance, and we have opportunity for both sides to offer a good faith effort to address an overwhelming issue that we all feel personally. I've spoken briefly to Senator Cory Booker, and I don't know what his reaction would be, but Mr. Chairman, I think that might be a way for us to acknowledge the obvious this bill is likely to be reported out, but still not to give up on good ideas like test strips or other things, other aspects that might be part of the solution.
Mr. Chairman, are we on the bill?
We're going to have is there any reaction to what Senator Durbin just said? If I said I agree with him?
I felt that you've made that agreement before, and in our private conversations, that you were going to continue to pursue efforts for a bipartisan solution. You've been showing me good faith all along the way in terms of your willingness to use this committee to meet the gravity and the enormity of the fentanyl crisis. So I'm hoping that this committee will do that. Mr. Chairman, I've got a lot of people in my state who are pushing me to try to do everything, and it would be difficult with no additions to this bill or changes to this bill not to at least put forward the amendments that people think are common sense, that have bipartisan support, in hopes that perhaps somebody changes their mind, or at least to show that we put them up and showed the common sense pragmatic nature of this. So I would like to offer my amendments, sir.
Okay. Proceed with your amendments.
Mr. Chairman, may I proceed?
Yes.
So I'd like to reintroduce my amendment ELL 25154, because when I introduced it the last time, there were very few of my colleagues, Republican colleagues, who were here. This is a very sensible amendment, and especially in light of the hearing that we had just 2 weeks ago, when Mr. Pruitt testified regarding the Devin Noring Foundation and all of the work that he and others like him are doing to educate the children in our country that fentanyl is very, very potent and dangerous, and that one dose can kill. But it was very clear that they could use some help, some recognition on our part that we can't just rely for prevention of the harmfulness of this drug to volunteers. Thankfully, they are out there. So my bill simply asks the Department of Justice, my amendment rather, in consultation with the Department of Education to issue a report on the barriers to fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances about abuse education and best practices on this education in schools. This is about prevention. And this simply says, DOJ, please inform us how is the best way that we can proceed to prevent. So I know that the law enforcement side, that's just one part of the fentanyl crisis, but I do think that prevention is a very important part, and this is an amendment that is very common sense. So I encourage my colleagues to vote for
I
it.
can't hear a thing you're saying. Senator Cornyn.
Mr. President, I know that several senators have amendments to this legislation. I just want to make sure, first of all, that the letters from 200 impacted family groups facing fentanyl is the name of the organization, in support of the bill as written, the National Association of Police Organizations, and another letter representing a significant portion of the nation's federal, state, and local law enforcement community, all in support of the bill as currently written without any amendment, that those are made part of the record.
Without objection, they will be. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr.
If I can just, if I can just respond to the, to Senator Hirono's statement. You know, fentanyl poisoning is the leading cause of death for young people between the age of 18 and 45. And I worry that the longer we dither over some of the fine points of chemistry on this bill, that it's like watching the house burn down and suggesting maybe we need to use a different sort of hose to put out the fire, or something. Maybe that's not the best analogy, but you get my point. There have been 60 years of research into fentanyl-related substances, and this bill just says any substance that is related to fentanyl would be scheduled as a dangerous drug and would be subject to and would be prohibited from sale. According to the DEA, as of January 2025, 36 different researchers are registered to conduct research into fentanyl-related substances through the existing Schedule I researcher program. So the idea that this needs more research, to me, is just not supported by the facts. And I worry that the longer we delay in the permanent scheduling of these fentanyl-related substances, that more people are simply just going to die. And I, like a lot of us, have gone to grieving families at schools all across the state of Texas, and I'm sure others have had this experience too, and met with grieving families whose young son or daughter has taken a pill that they believe was a relatively innocuous pill, only to not find out, but their parents found out that it was a counterfeit pill contaminated with fentanyl or some derivative of that, and killed them. So I think the best course of action, and I'm asking our members on both sides of the aisle, but that we resist any additional amendments which will delay the passage of this bill. I also am very concerned about any changes that we might make in the underlying bill, what the House of Representatives might do. They have a hard time passing much of anything with razor-thin margins. So I would just ask my colleagues to resist any of these amendments, no matter how well-intended, because I don't think they're going to serve the purpose for which I think we all agree, which is how do we save lives and prevent more fentanyl-related deaths.
Mr. Chairman,
20 people have died from fentanyl poisoning just while this committee's been meeting. Senator Booker,
and exactly.
I will always yield to Senator Hirono first.
go ahead, Senator.
Hold that thought. So, Mr. Chairman, I should think that we would care about prevention And this is an amendment that has nothing to do with the chemical components of fentanyl or its anodynes. So this is a bill that actually addresses prevention, something that we don't seem to spend very much time on around here. And so this is not a bill, Senator Cornyn, an amendment that will delay anything. It actually, in my view, will save lives when young people learn that this is a very deadly drug that they can easily obtain.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if our colleagues are worried about prevention, I think they would join us in doing more to secure the border and to prevent the smuggling of fentanyl into the country. And that's, obviously, there's been a wide divergence between the Biden administration and the Trump administration on that score, but stopping the flow of the drug in the United States, doing more to prevent the Chinese chemical companies from supplying those precursors to the cartels who manufacture the pills in Mexico would do a whole lot to prevent more fentanyl-related deaths. So I think the senator's amendment would do nothing.
Mr. Chairman, we heard testimony that this fentanyl is obtained on the internet. It has nothing to do with people bringing fentanyl through the borders. Let's get our facts straight.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, you said you would recognize me.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, on this amendment, but I do want to respond to my friend and colleague. The idea that we're dithering over science, to me, is difficult for me to swallow, given the mistakes this body has made. We didn't talk about the science and the differences between crack and powder cocaine, and we made a mistake. And it's not a mistake that it hasn't been talked to by both parties. This committee in the previous Congress worked to correct a mistake that unfortunately led to collectively thousands of years of unjust incarceration. And it's not asking for more research. You and I both know, like, God, it's the last thing we need. It's creating a research protocol after the fact of arrest to look at the actual substances to see, did these substances actually cause harm, or could some of these substances be used as an antagonist to actually help people in fentanyl crisis? It's just common sense. This isn't about dithering. I know the senator referenced that he's got scientists, and there's so many different scientific organizations, and we've entered them to the record before, we will again, that have called on us just to create the basic protocols. In addition to that, we don't need to lecture each other. Every person on this committee knows the urgency of getting this done. Everybody does. Everybody here has sat with families who are in pain. And you mentioned submitting to the letter the people that want this passed. I want to see permanent scheduling. I'd like to enter for the record a letter from 400 New Jersey families. This is not a national group. This is just New Jersey families.
Without objection, it will be entered.
And the letter that just asks for us to do as much as we possibly can to meet this crisis. And so to my friend, I don't think a lot of these amendments are asking to do things that don't have bipartisan support. To speak specifically to Maisie's amendment, to Senator Hirono's amendment, forgive me, she is asking for something that Republican witnesses spoke to, that law enforcement witnesses before our committee have spoken to, that a lot of the challenges they're facing right now is the fact that there's so much ignorance about these substances amongst young people that are putting them in positions where they're dying. And so when you have an idea, like is the core of this amendment, that speaks to common sense, bipartisan, Republican witness, Democratic witnesses, that speaks to what law enforcement agents in my state have been saying, when law enforcement is called to a scene where a child is dying, that is a reactive measure. It's not a proactive measure. And so I'm hoping that people will look and read the text of this amendment. It's not onerous, it's common sense. And then the last thing I want to say about the border, we know that most fentanyl is coming through various means, either Americans smuggling it over or as Senator Hirono said, over the internet. But I will tell you, every senator on this side does want to secure the border. And I'd like to remind my colleague that we entered into good faith negotiations and came up with a bill that Senator Langford led that would have done a lot to secure the border, but it was frustrated because of the current president's desire not to do a bipartisan strong border bill. And so again, the motives of all of us is to get this done. What we are doing, the HALT Act is simply affirming what has already been the case for many years, which is the scheduling. We are simply asking in this amendment of Senator Hirono to please do some bipartisan, widely supported, common sense, evidence-based things that would show that our reaction to, yes, the greatest killer of people 18 to 45, that would be more than just doing what we already have been doing for the last 5+ years. I support this amendment.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Graham?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornett?
No.
Mr. Lee?
No.
No.
Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
No.
Mr. Tillis?
No.
Mr. Kennedy? Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Mr. Smith?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Britt?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Moody? No. Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons?
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal? Aye. Ms. Hirono? Aye. Mr. Booker?
Aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye.
Mr. Welch?
Aye.
Mr. Schiff?
Aye.
Chairman Grassley?
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
12 to 2, the amendment lost. Were we ready to vote on the bill?
I have an amendment.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Amendment SIL 25171. This amendment, Mr. Chairman, is the bipartisan Opioids Act that I've introduced with Senator Scott of Florida. This would provide grants to states and localities. It would improve data and surveillance of opioid-related overdoses. It would also provide grants to law enforcement for additional training related to overdoses and fentanyl tracing, along with containment devices to prevent secondary exposure, which, as you know, is a significant issue. Finally, it requires the DEA to submit to Congress as part of its annual report the level of funding needed to effectively carry out the fentanyl signature profiling program. Senator Scott and I have worked together on this and would like to see this be part of this legislation. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
the amendment that our friend from Vermont has proposed is certainly sounds like something we could take up separate and apart from this legislation. As you know, the law enforcement community has urged that the HALT Fentanyl Act pass with no amendments in order to keep the text as close as possible to the bill passed by the House so we can get this to the President's desk without delay. But that doesn't preclude the senator from Vermont or any other member of the panel from offering good suggestions that we could take up at a later time.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a moment to speak up in support of the amendment before us. As Senator Welch has mentioned, it does enjoy bipartisan support, so it should not be time-consuming or problematic for this committee to accept and have it move along with the bill. It will not cause a delay, as has just been suggested. But I also feel compelled to point out a related dynamic here. We're talking about additional tools to better inform policy and strategy at the DEA, obviously within the FBI. During the budget committee process in the recently adopted budget resolution that we all went through last week, I made an effort there, unsuccessfully, to suggest that we protect any and all resources that are targeting fentanyl and its illegal trafficking and use in the United States from being diverted to other activities. If we're genuine and sincere about cracking down on fentanyl, we must be protective of the resources, the budgets, and the personnel that are so focused, and add to the toolbox the ideas as proposed in this amendment. So when we suggest motions through the budget or elsewhere that we ought to be protective, again, of the resources and personnel that are going after the fentanyl crisis in America, then let's maintain the commitment, not just in this bill here today, but in all areas of our efforts here in the Senate. So long way of saying I support this amendment. It should not be problematic, has bipartisan support, and hope it passes in a
Clerk will
moment.
call the roll.
Mr. President,
Senator
Mr.
Booker.
Chairman, sir,
Senator Booker.
I wish you were president. Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, I'm calling on.
thank you, sir. Thank
Go
you, sir.
ahead.
Just to Senator Cornyn's point, if I may again, this is already going to have to go back because of the manager's package. It is already going to have to go back to the House for them to re-vote on it. And so adding bipartisan supported bills with bipartisan support in the House and bipartisan support here, like test strips, to me, it seems like a logical thing to do on this vehicle. Should we not include that in this bill? I just want folks to know what it means not to include that in this bill. Say it takes us 6 months, and that would be glorious, frankly, if we got another fentanyl bill to fight the scourge done in 6 months. But say it took us 6 months. It is undoubtedly that we would see deaths happen in our country because children did not have access to fentanyl strips. So by us, to use my colleague's word, dithering, and not putting bipartisan supported bills like this, we are putting a situation in which lives could be saved, and we failed to do that. I strongly, strongly ask my colleagues, in one of the greatest threats in our time, to please do more than just a bill that is simply doing what is already done in the temporary scheduling of fentanyl.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Graham.
Graham, no, by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. No. Mr. Tillis. No. Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Britt.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Moody. No. Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Aye. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Mr. Schiff.
Aye.
Chairman Grassley.
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
Okay, the amendment lost. Are we ready to?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just briefly speak to two other amendments that are about to be brought up. I have worked across the aisle with my friend and colleague, Senator Cornyn, on a federal test strip bill. And I have supported Senator Booker on a reporting and transparency provision. I think requiring reporting makes great sense. I think all of us have worked in favor of transparency over a number of Congresses. And I really hope that we will find a way to make sure that there is robust and reliable reporting from the FBI to this committee, to this Congress, in order to understand what are the appropriate targets for private research, what are the consequences of this bill, and how to make sure that we're pursuing a path that keeps scheduled those analogs that are harmful and open for potential research or remediation or use those that are not. Thank you.
Yeah, let's report the bill. Clerk will call the roll.
We don't have enough votes on the bill.
Oh, I guess we don't have enough people here to vote the bill out. Go ahead.
I've got it.
Or are we done and we'll recess until 1 o'clock?
I'm happy to bring up my amendments at 1 o'clock if people have places to go.
Go ahead with your amendment now.
So the first one I'd like to bring up, Mr. Chairman, is OLL 25212. This amendment would add a requirement that DEA provide Congress an annual report of the number of FRS DOJ has identified, what review has been conducted and for which the FRS was determined not to be Schedule I, and the number of criminal prosecutions in which an offense involving the specific FRS. Currently, the DEA and DOJ are not forthcoming about the FRS they've identified or whether they're testing the substances at all. The data that is public and that is provided our office has been inconsistent for years. It seems if this is one of the biggest issues that is concerning us, that we would at least ask for transparency.
Let me interrupt you. We don't have a quorum, so we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, sir. To understand when we pass a law what the administration is doing. It seems very clear to me that we are passing this, we're looking to pass the HALT Act, but we have no mechanism to understand that with these fentanyl analogs, what is the DOJ, the DEA doing? They've been not forthcoming through multiple administrations, at least 2 administrations, with the FRS they've identified. And so it seems if we want to fight this scourge, that we have an obligation, as spelled out by the Constitution, to provide oversight to the departments that are doing it. It's just a common sense thing. I want to thank you publicly. In a good faith, your team and my team, we're asking about this and trying to come to a negotiated settlement, as Chris Coons mentioned before he left. One of the things that was said is, well, maybe the GAO could provide the report. But the truth is that the GAO couldn't provide the report because they would have to go to the FBI to get the information. And when we called the GAO, pursuing your team's solution, sir, they said to us, why add more bureaucracy to have to go from the FBI to the GAO than to Congress? It seems far simpler and less burdensome just to Congress to get the information they're asking for. And so I fully support, as I have in the past, temporary scheduling of fentanyl. I fully support the permanent scheduling of fentanyl. But as we have a vehicle that's moving, if we're going to permanently schedule this, Congress should have a mechanism to get the information that they need in order to make sure that the DOJ, whether it's under a Democratic administration or Republican administration, is actually doing their job. And so I feel very strongly that this is the lightest touch we could ask for, which is something we ask for in so many bills, is just report on what you're doing. What we're asking is just not onerous. It is done routinely throughout Congress and empowers us to do our job. Because absent this, we'll have no knowledge of what they are doing when it comes to the FRS that they're recovering. And so unless somebody else wants to speak on this, I fully would like to ask for a vote.
Okay, clerk will call the roll. No, but Graham, no by proxy.
Mr. Graham?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
No.
Mr. Lee?
No.
Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley? Mr. Hawley?
No.
Mr. Holly, no by proxy.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Tillis?
No by proxy.
Mr.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt,
No by proxy.
Mrs. Britt,
No by proxy.
Mrs. Moody. No. Mr. Durbin,
No? Aye, I'm sorry.
Mr. Whitehouse,
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Coons,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal. Sorry, Mr. Blumenthal, thank you. Ms. Hirono,
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Booker,
Most certainly aye.
Mr. Padilla. Mr. Welch. Mr. Schiff. Chairman Grassley.
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
Okay. 12 to 10, the amendment is defeated. So now we,
Still have the,
so come back at 1 o'clock.
does he have any further amendments? Are there any amendments?
Are there any more amendments?
I have a number of amendments, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah. Senator Kennedy?
I have a question. Is that okay?
Yes.
Some of us have other committees, and I know we want to consider the amendments, and I know there's a meeting at the White House. Can you tell us, in your best estimate, when we're going to vote on the bill?
I would like to reconvene at 1 o'clock to go through the amendments and vote on the bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Okay. We don't have a quorum,
We should
so
still keep going.
what?
I think we should still keep going until we get through and people have to leave. So let's keep voting through amendments now.
Okay. Any, you want to go ahead with your next amendment, Mr. Booker?
So I'm just trying to understand. We don't have the votes for the final passage of the bill right now.
That's right.
And your intention is still to vote on the amendments to the bill.
Yeah.
I would prefer to have my amendments come up when there's a quorum and my colleagues are here.
There's a quorum. Maybe there is a quorum.
There's a quorum. So go
Okay,
ahead.
then I will continue, Mr. Chairman. The next bill I have is regarding something similar to what was brought up before, which was the idea of test strips. This is actually to do something that, again, is very common sense, but to provide resources for states voluntarily, if they want to get resources to provide the life-saving test strips. To, again, underline the urgency to my colleagues, there are many people, as we all know, in the campaign that has been done in the previous administration, the One Bill Can Kill campaign. There are many young people who end up taking something they think is another substance. It could be something as like Adderall or what have you, and they end up getting fentanyl that kills them. Test strips have proven in red states and blue states to be something that can be life-saving. That if you have a test strip to put on, to use for these substances, it could alert people to the fact that that fentanyl is present. And so this idea of making test strips more available to more people will literally save lives.
We don't have a vote.
It's proven to be life-saving time and time again. And that's why fentanyl test strips are supported by law enforcement. That's why fentanyl test strips are supported by prosecutors. That's why fentanyl test strips are supported by doctors and medical associations. That's why fentanyl test strips are supported by families of victims whose children died not knowing what substance they had. And so something as common sense as this, something that has bipartisan support, something that we know will save American lives, should have a sense of urgency to it. Because as you said, Mr. Chairman, moments ago, that in the time that we're having this discussion, people are dying. But they're not dying because fentanyl is not scheduled, because fentanyl is scheduled right now. They're dying because they don't have the tools, the education, the resources to prevent this from happening in the first place. That's the rub. When it's pointed out that people are dying right now while we are having this conversation, it is false to say that's because we haven't passed this bill, because fentanyl is scheduled. And if our only response to the people dying during the time that we have this conversation is to do something that is already done, then that to me is the very definition of Congress doing nothing. This is a moving vehicle. Put on bipartisan ideas like my amendment right now in order to give a more wholesome response to a crisis. Test strips are widely supported. They're used in blue states and red states. There are state legislators from both parties who have put them forward, and therefore, I put it forward right now. Unless somebody else would like to speak on my amendment, I would like to call for a vote.
Senators,
Mr.
can
Chairman.
we vote? You want to speak?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schiff, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll be very brief. I just think that Senator Booker has expressed it so perfectly. That is, this bill codifies existing policy. It doesn't make a change to the schedule that hasn't already been put into effect. But this amendment does something new, additional, life-saving, non-controversial, bipartisan. And as we discussed during the last hearing on this bill has to go back to the House anyway. And there is bipartisan support in the House for the bill. Providing this amendment, I think, would only increase that, not detract from it. And I think Senator Booker has put his finger on exactly a big part of the problem. And that is, yes, some people take fentanyl because they know it's fentanyl and they want to take fentanyl. But a great many people who die of fentanyl poisoning are dying because they have taken something they did not know contained fentanyl. They are students who took something they bought online because they thought it would help them stay awake during exams, or they bought something online that they thought would help them concentrate and focus. They had no idea they were buying something that was going to kill them. And having these test strips, where the test strips are for a student in their dorm or at some student gathering, much as we would like to say, don't take anything at a student gathering, people do, but having these test strips available to young people will undoubtedly save lives. I mean, this is not theoretical here. And so I urge support for Senator Booker's amendment and yield back.
Clerk, call roll.
This is on Booker Amendment BAI 25062, correct?
No, it's BAI 25062.
Okay. Mr. Graham?
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
Nope.
Mr. Lee?
Nope.
Mr. Cruz? No. Mr. Hawley?
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
Nope.
Mr. Kennedy?
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt? No. Mrs. Britt? No. Mrs. Moody? No. Mr. Durbin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse?
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar?
Aye. By proxy.
Mr. Coos?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Rono?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Booker?
Surprise, surprise, aye.
Mr. Padilla?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Welch?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schiff? Aye. Chairman Grassley?
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are
12 to 2. I'd like to call the bill up for a vote now. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, I have more amendments, sir.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call up OLL 25210. This amendment invests in public health and prevention measures by authorizing funds for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration for harm reduction programs to address what is our greatest national public health crisis. In New Jersey, we passed legislation last year that expanded access to life-saving harm reduction supplies, allowing harm reduction centers to distribute naloxone and other opioid antidotes. We need to invest in these type of common sense measures if we truly want to get a handle on addiction and overdose crisis. Every major medical association that has spoken to this issue has said this is a public health crisis. To have solely a law enforcement response, especially a response that we have had, a tool that we've had in the law enforcement toolbox for years now, as Congress has done the right thing and temporarily scheduled fentanyl analogs, to not have a public health response, to me, seems us walking blindly along the same strategies and seeing a crisis that we're not doing more as the world's most deliberative body to meet. This is indeed a public health crisis. This is indeed a mental health crisis. And there are so many young people in our country who cannot access the kind of preventative measures that would help them prevent their engagement with these dangerous substances in the first place. This is not just the chorus of consensus from our public health professionals in America, in red states and blue states, but is actually a chorus of consensus of the witnesses we just had before us, who have said we need a more wholesome response to one of the greatest public health crises in our country. And so this is common sense, this is bipartisan, this is evidence-based, this is something that we could easily do as a Congress right now to not put a common sense public health and mental health action on this that would not cost a great amount of resources. To not do that is to face a crisis and say the only thing we're going to do is what we've been doing. I ask my colleagues, I beseech them to do more about the fentanyl crisis on this bill as it moves through Congress. To not do something and to say that we'll do it later. Is it 1 month later? Is it 6 months later? Is it a year later? Is it a whole Congress later? If that happens, people will die as a result of our inaction. So I ask for a vote on OLL 25210, unless there's other people who would like to speak to this amendment.
Clerk will call roll.
Mr. Graham.
By proxy? No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt.
No.
Mrs. Britt. No. Mrs. Moody. No. Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Serrano.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schiff. Aye. Chairman Grassley.
No. Well,
The ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
yeah, the amendment lost. Can we vote on the bill now?
I have more amendments, sir.
Proceed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the recognition. I would like to call up Amendment OLL 25213. This is an amendment that would ensure that the FRS scheduled have a high potential for abuse and no medical value by requiring a basic review to determine a substance's pharmacological effect. As drafted, the HALT Act would outlaw substances that have a similar chemical structure as fentanyl, but not a similar effect. For example, substances that act as blockers, that is, things like antigens, like naloxone, would be scheduled simply based on their chemical structure. The only other time Congress enacted class-wide scheduling was in 2012 in the Synthetic Drug Abuse Prevention Act. The language of this amendment is taken directly from that law that we passed in a bipartisan way. It is not burdensome. It is not additive. It is common sense. It draws from a bipartisan supported bill that is similar and related. Again, these are things that we can do that have shown in the past to have bipartisan support, that are not particularly objectionable, that would add to our ability as a nation to meet this crisis. For this Congress to have its only major response in the last 10 years that I've been here to this fentanyl crisis to just do a bill which is affirming what we have already done is not an adequate response. There are non-controversial things we can do. There are bipartisan supported things we can do. There are evidence-based things we can do. There are things that the law enforcement community is calling for that we can do. There are things that the medical community is calling for that we can do. This is one of those common sense, bipartisan, evidence-based approaches. I beseech my colleagues to do more in this bill to meet the gravity of this crisis. Bill Amendment OLL 25213 is one of those measures, and unless somebody else would like to speak to this, I call for a vote on my amendment.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Grant.
Grant.
No.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz. No. Mr. Hawley.
No.
Mr. Tillis.
No.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt. Mrs. Britt. No. Mrs. Moody. No. Mr. Durbin.
Aye.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
I have a proxy.
Ms. Hirono.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Schiff. Chairman Grassley.
No.
On this vote, the ayes are 10, the nays are 12.
Yeah. We're,
Mr. Chairman, can I be recorded as present? Aye.
you can be, yes. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring up another amendment.
We're going to move the bill. We're going to vote it out right now.
Mr. Chairman, I think I have a right to offer amendments to a bill.
The clerk will call the roll on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I'm confident the rules of this committee would allow me to offer common sense, good faith amendments that would make this bill better.
Mr. Grant.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz. Mr. Hawley.
Aye.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt. Mrs. Britt. Aye. Mrs. Moody. Aye. Mr. Durbin.
No.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
What's that?
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Coons.
I have a proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono.
No by proxy.
Mis- Mr. Chairman, I would like to bring up Rule 4 of this committee, which says you cannot close off debate without a vote on that first. I'm willing to be outvoted, but it requires at least one vote of the minority. What we're doing is unprecedented. I would remind folks that we are operating with one of the most important bills, dealing with one of the most important issues. To cut off debate, to cut off the ability for members to bring up their amendments, good faith amendments that have bipartisan support, to me seems uncalled for. But in accordance to Rule 4, if you're going to do that, you should do it by the rules of the committee and call for a vote to cut me off, offering good faith, common sense, evidence-based, bipartisan ideas to make a bill better to save lives that are currently dying because of the opioid crisis. To cut off the ability to improve this bill with bipartisan ideas, to me, is unacceptable.
Continue to call the roll.
Mr. Padilla?
No.
Mr. Welch? Mr. Welch? Mr. Schiff?
Welch, no by proxy.
Chairman Grassley?
Welch, no by proxy.
Chairman, yes.
On this vote, the ayes are 16, the nays are 5.
The bill is reported, the meeting's adjourned.